The future is here. This Gearbox eMTB proves that alternative drivetrains are the future. But this bike isn't just a concept. You could buy one right now. And I'm going to show you why Pinion's MGU is a viable alternative to a traditional drivetrain. Haibike's latest eMTB showcases the powertrain of the future, an automatic shifting 12-speed gearbox with belt drive wrapped around an e-bike motor. The motor provides 800 watts and 85 Newton meters of torque. There are 4 modes: Fly, Flex, Flow and Eco, offering up to 400% assistance. It has a Gates carbon belt drive, which they say is good for 30,000 kilometers. The bike itself is called the Haibike ALLMTN CF 11 TRN/IQ. It costs £9,000 and weighs under 25 kilos thanks to the carbon fibre frame. Let's see what it's like to ride and then dive into the details to find out what makes this machine special. Through the puddles, big air time, it's nice and stable on the big jumps. All that mass is really central on the bike. Suspension hooks up super well. Continental tyres providing plenty of grip even in the mud. We're going to go up this steep e-bike climb here and test out that gearbox, see what it's like to use and see how the weight works. So bang through a load of gears, it's very fast, you can shift through the gears even if you're not pedalling. So let's turn on the auto shift now and see how that works. So you just hold down the front shifter paddle, then it says A on the screen, and then you can select the cadence that you're choosing. So I'm going for 85 revs per minute for my cranks across the trail here, and yeah, now it's shifting the gears for me. So the faster I go, the more it changes through the gears. And I'm going into fly mode, which is the equivalent of turbo on other bikes. I'm going for slightly higher cadence, up to 90 RPM, because that feels about right on this climb. Well, it's back to power. I'm certainly not lacking in grunt from the motor. Let's see how it climbs over these routes. It's 24.5 kilos, so there's quite a lot of weight to throw around. Okay, there, it's changing gears for me into easier gears now as I get into the really slippery, sloppy stuff and I slow down. Now, one thing that is strange is the automatic gearbox, it predicts what cadence you'll be at based on how fast you're going. So it changes gear whilst you're not pedaling because it knows how fast your cadence will be when you do start pedaling again, because it knows how fast the bike's going, which is really clever. Okay, so it's making absolute mincemeat of these wet routes. The auto shifting means that as my speed goes up and down, I'm always in the right gear, and you probably can't even hear the shifts happening on the camera because it is just so quiet and effortless. Or serious root garden here, oh, and I'm off. So not infallible, but seriously impressive at climbing. As I say, plenty of power, tyres are really good, plenty of drive. The seated climbing position, perhaps I'm an inch or so further back than I'd like to be. I'd like to be a bit more over the bottom bracket, but that's not the end of the world. It's not so much freeing up the brain space that you need to shift. It's more doing it in time, or when something goes wrong and you do find yourself unexpectedly slowing down, suddenly you're still in the right gear. And that's a very pleasant surprise. So here we are at the top. We're going to go and drop into MBUK, which is Bike Park Wales' new red trail. So the suspension is really nice and supportive. That horse link design works really well in terms of tuning your anti-squat, tuning your anti-rise, of how the suspension geometry works. It jumps really well, this thing. It's very intuitive to ride. It just feels like a mountain bike, like a well-sorted mountain bike that's got these great extra functions from the gearbox, and yeah, wrestling it down a rooty, muddy track is second nature, really. Alright, the geometry's not as progressive as it could be, but you're not noticing that it's holding you back. It's just, as I say, very intuitive to ride. Tyres are really good, plenty of traction. I like a mullet bike, so the mixed wheel size working well for me there. Brakes are really good. I like these Maguras. They offer loads of feedback. And the modulation on the bite point, which I really like. The Rockshox suspension, really good. Great quality of damping, feels really supportive when you dive into a berm and you're loading it up properly. Whew. Yeah, sweet bike, I really like it. Everything's in the right place. No surprises really from the way the suspension works. Once you've got your damping and your pressures all dialed in, it just is very intuitive to ride. I'd like a longer dropper really, because I'd love to be able to get the seat further out of the way on the descents. 150mm isn't really long enough for a large size bike. I think 170, 180mm would be better. But yeah, that's a minor gripe. And yeah, impressed how well the gearbox works on auto.
Future tech like gearboxes are often touted as being just over the horizon, but not quite ready for the mainstream yet. Pinion have quietly executed a gearbox that not only works, but when combined with an e-bike motor, is a viable alternative to a traditional drivetrain. The motor is nestled within the clusters of gears inside the gearbox, so it's a really compact unit. And the stats speak for themselves. With 12 gears, an automatic shifting function, and a 10,000 kilometer service interval, which is only changing the oil, this could genuinely be the answer to a long-lasting e-bike drivetrain. At 24.5 kilos, it's a comparable weight to other e-bikes at a similar price point. So there isn't even much of a sacrifice in terms of weight, despite all those steel cogs within the gearbox. Shifting under load is dealt with better than any gearbox I've ever used before, and just look at the packaging. If it wasn't missing a mech, you wouldn't even know there was a gearbox hidden inside there. And it's easy to use too, with very little learning required. If you can use a rapid fire style shifter and you've ridden a mountain bike before, this would be a piece of cake. But there are some downsides. The shifts from 4th to 5th and from 8th to 9th are not as smooth as the other gear shifts. Now, I reached out to Pinion to ask why, and this is what they had to say. The 12 gears are formed of 2 units, consisting of 4 and 3 gear pairs. So 4 times 3 equals 12, that gives you your 12 gears. One pawl is always active in each of the 2 gear units. So in first gear, the first gear is selected in both units. So from 1 to 4, the change always takes place in the first sub-gear. Then when you go from 4th to 5th, the first sub-gear unit shifts back from gear 4 to gear 1, and at the same time, the second unit shifts from gear 1 to gear 2. So there's 2 shifts happening internally in the gearbox at once. So that's why those shifts take longer. And the same thing happens from 8th to 9th, and in the second unit, it shifts from 2nd to 3rd gear. Still with me? Good. So I didn't find the shifts too irksome. You can notice them, and you notice that they take longer, but it doesn't necessarily put you off your stride, especially if you're in a higher cadence. And that tallies with what Pinion said. They said the higher the cadence that you can maintain, the easier it's going to be to do those 2 shifts. And if you're in automatic mode, you can select your cadence anyway. Like any curious journalist, I let as many people as I could jump on this bike to get their feedback on the gearbox. And there were 2 overriding comments that they had to say. One, it feels like a PDK gearbox in a car, so an automatic or Tiptronic shifting gearbox. They said the way that it shifts between gears and the sort of soft nature of the shift with the belt makes it feel the same as an automatic or Tiptronic gearbox in a car. The second thing they said is that it feels like the shifter is backwards, with the rearmost paddle changing into a harder gear and the frontmost paddle changing into an easier gear. But this is configurable with Pinion's eFit app. So if you log in, you can change what the shifter paddles do. And obviously, if you're in automatic, that's irrelevant anyway. Now, the gearbox itself is surprisingly quiet, but there is a whine from the motor that is more noticeable than some other e-bike motors on the market. So again, we reached out to Pinion and they said that this is something they're aware of and something they're working on. They didn't specify how, but it's in the works. Aside from these small gripes, my experience with the Pinion MGU has been amazingly uneventful. I haven't had any missed shifts, I haven't had any programming or electronic issues, I haven't had any glitches from it at all. It's just worked from day one, the first time I pressed the shifter to now. Now let's look at how the MGU compares to other e-bike motors on the market. So it offers 85 Newton meters of torque, which is 15 Newton meters down on Bosch, 16 Newton meters down on Specialized, and 40 Newton meters down on DJI's Avinox motor. We asked Pinion if they planned a firmware update similar to Bosch's update in May to free up more torque, but they said that wasn't their primary focus at the moment. Let's look at maintenance. Now, Pinion say that the gearbox will go with no maintenance, but it needs an oil change every 10,000 kilometers. And Gates say that the carbon belt drive is good for 30,000 kilometers. So if this gearbox is as reliable as Pinion say, then it really could dramatically outlast traditional drivetrains. eMTB drivetrains suffer considerable amounts of wear, not just from the extra torque available from the motor, but also from the massive miles possible to clock up on an e-bike. So therefore, this gearbox could, over many years, provide considerable cost savings over a traditional chain and cassette. The frame's down tube houses an 800 watt-hour battery, which is equivalent to competitors. I tested it in flex mode to see what range I would get, and I managed to achieve 35 kilometers and 1,600 vertical meters of climbing here at Bike Park Wales. I did use quite a steep ascent. I was using a steep trail to come down, and there were patches of mud on the e-bike climb. So they're all things that could have confounded the test, but that was what I got. So, is there extra drag from the gearbox and the belt drive? Well, without testing it on a dyno, it's impossible to know for sure. I feel as if there is, because when you hit the 15.5 mile an hour speed limit on an e-bike and the power shuts off, it feels like you hit more of a wall than you do on a chain drive bike. And also, in off mode, where you can still use the shifting, but you don't get the assistance, you also feel that extra drag. Let's take a closer look at the bike this gearbox is attached to. We'll have a look at the spec and then dive into the geometry. Haibike have made practical but not flashy componentry choices for the CF11, and that means it comes in at £9,000, including the all-important gearbox. The Haibike ALLMTN CF11 has a full carbon frame, including the rocker links, seat stays and chainstay, and it uses a horse link style suspension design. Unlike some of the earlier Haibike models, which did look a little awkward, I think the lines on this thing are great, and it's got quite an eye-catching colour too. It features a mullet wheel setup with a 29-inch up front and a 27.5-inch at the back, and 160mm travel front and rear. The fork is a RockShox Zeb Ultimate RC2 with a Charger 3.1 damper, and out the back, the shock is a RockShox Super Deluxe Ultimate RC2T. The bike is equipped with a 12-speed version of Pinion's MGU called the E1.12. It's configurable with the Fit e-bike app, and it's connected to the Pinion 165mm cranks and Gates carbon belt drive. The brakes are Magura MT5 4-piston units with 203mm calipers. It runs Continental Crypto Tile tyres with the soft compound and the Enduro casing, and they're wrapped around DT Swiss's H1900 e-bike specific wheels. The finishing kit is Haibike's own, with a 780mm bar and a 35mm stem to put you at ease in the cockpit. Geometry is typical of a modern eMTB, with no nasty surprises but no progressive elements either. Head angle is 64 degrees, the reach on a large is 485mm and 515 for an XL. However, aside from these figures, it's worth noting that the carbon ALLMTNs are not as progressive in the geometry department as the aluminium ones. So the bottom bracket is 10mm higher than the ALLMTN 6 I tested, the chainstays are 15mm shorter, and the seat angle is 2.5 degrees slacker. So perhaps the carbon frames do need an update. So what's the verdict? Well, this is a huge amount of bike for the money. £9,000 isn't cheap. But to put it in perspective, Specialized S-Works Levo is £14,000, and that doesn't have a gearbox. Whilst the bike itself isn't groundbreaking, the build and the numbers are certainly good enough to showcase the potential of Pinion's MGU. A gearbox combined with an electric motor is now a viable alternative to a traditional drivetrain in 2025. The real-world benefits like mass centralisation, quietness and long service intervals more than outweigh any drawbacks in terms of weight and functionality. If I could only have one bike, I think it would have to be an eMTB. And if I had an eMTB, I'd want it to be as low maintenance as possible. So this bike, with its low unsprung mass, the quietness of it and its long service intervals, has definitely earned a place in my imaginary shed. But what do you think? Would you buy a bike with a gearbox? Would you spend your hard-earned on this? Or do you think traditional drivetrains are here to stay? Let us know in the comments. And why not check out this video next?